My grandson gave me a box of cookies for my birthday, but I gave them to his mother. My name is Margaret Hollis, and I still remember the exact look on everyone's face that day. The sharp silence that followed after I pushed the small box of cookies across the table to my daughter-in-law. Birthdays aren't supposed to feel like this. At my age 67, I don't expect grand parties or mountains of gifts. A quiet dinner, a kind word, a warm hug from my grandson. That's enough for me. But this year, even before the candles were lit, there was already a thick layer of tension in the air. I sat at the long wooden table in my son's dining room. My grandson, Ethan, had insisted on baking something himself. He's only 10, but he's inherited my sweet tooth. When he walked in from the kitchen carrying a small, unevenly wrapped box, my heart softened. His hands were still dusted with flour, his smile a little nervous. He said, "Happy birthday, Grandma," and handed me the box as if it were treasure. I opened it slowly, not because of the gift itself, but because of what it represented: his effort, his thoughtfulness. Inside were a dozen cookies, lopsided, slightly burnt on the edges, but beautiful to me in their imperfection. I reached out and hugged him, letting the smell of sugar and chocolate chips wrap around me. But then my eyes flicked upward, and I saw her. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Arms crossed, lips pressed together, watching me with that familiar expression, a blend of judgment and irritation. She never said anything outright in moments like this, but her silence always carried a weight heavier than words. That's when the decision came to me. A small gesture, perhaps petty in the eyes of others, but one that carried the sharp edge of all the years I had been ignored, diminished, treated like an outsider in my own family. I turned to her and smiled politely. "Vanessa," I said, sliding the box of cookies across the table. "Why don't you take these? They'll suit you well." The room fell into silence. Ethan's smile faltered. My son, Daniel, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Vanessa blinked, clearly not expecting it. I kept my expression calm, almost kind, though inside my heart was pounding like a drum. For years, I had endured her subtle digs, the way she criticized my cooking, the way she told Ethan not to spend too much time with me because I might fill his head with old-fashioned nonsense, the way she'd excluded me from family decisions, making me feel like a stranger in my own son's home. But this time, with that box of cookies, I saw a chance. It wasn't about the cookies at all. It was about refusing to let her see me as weak, as someone she could control or dismiss. Ethan looked at me with confusion in his eyes. My chest tightened. I hadn't wanted to hurt him. But the truth is, sometimes a small act of rebellion comes at a cost. And my daughter-in-law needed to know I wasn't invisible. Vanessa gave a laugh, short and sharp, trying to smooth over the tension. "Well, isn't that sweet?" she said, reaching for the box. But her eyes told another story. They glinted with something: anger, maybe even fear. She was not used to me pushing back, even in such a small way. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, Ethan made those for you. You should keep them." His voice was gentle, but not firm enough to stand against his wife's presence. He had long learned to choose silence over conflict. I smiled at my grandson. "I know, sweetheart. And they're beautiful. But sharing is part of love, isn't it? We'll let your mother enjoy them too." Ethan looked uncertain, torn between wanting me to keep them and wanting his mother's approval. My heart ached at the sight of his little shoulders tightening with confusion, but I held steady. My words weren't for him, not really. They were for Vanessa. And from the flicker in her eyes, I knew she had received the message. The rest of the dinner carried on awkwardly. Vanessa made small talk, her tone just a little too bright, her hands clutching the cookie box like it was a trophy she had won. Daniel tried to steer the conversation toward neutral topics: the weather, work, Ethan's school projects, but beneath the surface, everyone felt the ripple of what had just happened. Later that evening, after cake was served and Ethan had gone upstairs to bed, I stayed behind to help clear the table. Vanessa stacked plates in silence, her movements brisk, efficient. I picked up the cookie box, still unopened, and set it gently on the counter. "You didn't have to do that," she said suddenly, her voice low, sharp as glass. "Do what?" I asked softly. "Give me the cookies." It made Ethan feel awkward. I met her gaze. "I thought you'd appreciate them." Her lips curved into that smile she always wore, when speaking to me, a smile that wasn't truly a smile at all. "You're clever, Margaret. But don't start making things complicated." I said nothing more. I just kept washing the dishes, listening to the clink of ceramic against the sink. But inside, something had shifted. It was small, almost invisible, like the first crack in a sheet of ice. I realized that night that I had drawn a line. A fragile one, yes, but it was there. And from the way Vanessa looked at me, I knew she understood. This was only the beginning. The days after my birthday dinner felt heavier than usual. I couldn't stop thinking about the cookies, not the sweetness of Ethan's little hands shaping them, but the way I had deliberately slid them across the table to Vanessa. It was a simple gesture, but I knew it had unsettled the fragile balance in our family. It wasn't a mistake. I meant every second of it. I woke up the next morning to the soft hum of the neighborhood outside my window. The world carried on as if nothing had changed: children on bikes, dogs barking, the mail truck rattling down the street. But inside me, there was a shift, a sense that something long buried had surfaced. For years, I had swallowed Vanessa's behavior, the condescension, the dismissive looks, the way she always found a way to remind me that I was lucky they included me in family gatherings. She spoke as if my presence in my son's life was a favor she granted, as if I hadn't carried him for 9 months, raised him, sacrificed for him. And then there was Ethan. Sweet, tender-hearted Ethan. I loved that boy with every piece of me, and I knew he loved me back. But Vanessa wanted to control that love, to ration it out like it was hers to decide. That's why the cookies mattered. They were Ethan's love, in the form of flour, sugar, and burnt edges. And when I handed them to Vanessa, I wasn't rejecting him. I was rejecting her control. Daniel called me the next day. His voice was tentative, careful, the way a man speaks when he doesn't want to stir up more trouble. "Mom, about last night," he began. "Yes?" "You hurt Ethan's feelings. He worked hard on those cookies." I closed my eyes. "I know. And I told him how much I loved them. But sharing is also love, Daniel." There was silence on the other end. Then, a quiet sigh. "Vanessa feels like you were making a point." I almost laughed, though it came out bitter. Was I wrong? "Mom, Daniel, she's been making points for years. Every time she cuts me out, every time she tells Ethan that I don't understand the world, every time she makes me feel like an intruder in your home." Don't tell me this was the first point made. He didn't argue. He never did. That was his problem. He lived in Vanessa's shadow, and he had learned to bend instead of stand. After that call, I knew things would not simply return to normal. Vanessa would not let my gesture go unnoticed. She was the kind of woman who needed to win, to stay one step ahead. And if she thought I was beginning to resist, she would double her efforts to put me back in my place. Sure enough, the next time I visited, her tone was sweeter than honey. "Margaret, how lovely to see you," she sang, kissing the air beside my cheek. She even set a cup of tea in front of me, jasmine, my favorite, though she'd never remembered before. I sat at their polished oak table, watching her performance. Daniel busied himself in the kitchen, avoiding the tension. Ethan ran up to me and hugged me tight, whispering, "I made another batch for you, Grandma, just for us this time." My eyes watered, but I pressed a finger to my lips and nodded. He understood. This was our secret. Vanessa joined me at the table, crossing her legs and smiling. "You know, I think it's wonderful that Ethan enjoys baking. It's such a useful hobby, though I worry sometimes he spends a little too much time, well, indulging. Children should focus on practical things, don't you agree?" I stirred my tea slowly. Practical things like learning to dismiss kindness. Her smile froze for just a second before she recovered. Oh, Margaret. Always so witty. That was how it always went. Polite words covering barbed wires. And I played along. Until I didn't. Because deep down, I knew something had changed after the cookie incident. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had shown her I could push back, even in small ways. And if she thought I would retreat into silence again, she was mistaken. That night, as I walked home under the dim glow of the streetlights, I thought of Ethan's eyes, how they lit up when he gave me that first box. I thought of Daniel's silence, the weight he carried, but never dared to challenge. And I thought of Vanessa, with her perfect smile and iron grip on this family. I made a promise to myself. I would not let her erase me. Not as a mother. Not as a grandmother. Not as a woman who still had her own dignity. Handing her those cookies was not a mistake. It was the first deliberate step. And though I didn't know it yet, that single gesture would lead to revelations and confrontations far beyond what I had imagined. This was no longer just about cookies. It was about reclaiming my place and forcing Vanessa to see me, whether she wanted to or not. I couldn't sleep for nights after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment Ethan's smile faltered, the confusion on his little face when I slid that box away from me. My heart ached at the thought of hurting him, but the truth was, that gesture wasn't about him at all. It was about me, about years of swallowing words I should have spoken, years of lowering my head just to keep peace. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, and memories began resurfacing the countless moments when Vanessa had cut me down with the sharpest of whispers disguised as sweetness. I remembered the first Thanksgiving after she and Daniel married. I had spent all day in the kitchen, basting the turkey, making pies, setting the table with the china I'd saved for special occasions. When Vanessa arrived, she took one look at the spread and laughed lightly. "Oh, Margaret, you really do things the old-fashioned way, don't you? I guess some people never change." Everyone chuckled, even Daniel, and I felt the sting of humiliation flush my cheeks. I remembered birthdays when she would buy me gifts that weren't really gifts at all. A wrinkle cream wrapped in bright paper, an apron with "Kitchen Queen" printed in bold letters. She'd grin and say, "Just a little joke," while Daniel smiled weakly, and I forced myself to laugh along. And I remembered the cruelest of all, the day she told Ethan, right in front of me, "Don't bother Grandma with your games, sweetheart. She's too old to keep up. Let's go outside." He hesitated, torn, then followed her obediently. I sat there in silence, holding back tears, my hands trembling around a cup of untouched tea. That was the pattern of my life for more than a decade. Always being reminded that I was too much, or not enough. Too old, too weak, too irrelevant. Daniel never defended me, not once. He would later apologize, saying he didn't want to make things worse. As if my dignity was worth sacrificing for peace at the dinner table. So when I gave her those cookies, it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment choice. It was the accumulation of all those years. 100 small humiliations condensed into one quiet act of defiance. And yet, even knowing this, guilt lingered. Ethan didn't understand the war between me and his mother. He shouldn't have to. His love for me was pure, and I had tainted it, even if only for a moment. The next time he visited my house, he came bounding through the door with a plastic bag clutched in his hands. "Grandma," he said, grinning, "I made you another batch, but this time, don't give them away." His eyes twinkled with mischief. I laughed, pulling him close. "I promise, sweetheart, these are ours." He leaned close, his voice lowering. "Mom said you didn't even want them. But I know you did." My chest tightened. "Of course I did, Ethan. I love anything you make for me. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His little brow furrowed. "Sometimes Mom says things about you. Things I don't like." "What kind of things?" I asked carefully, stroking his hair. He shrugged. "That you don't understand stuff. That you're slow." But I don't believe her. You're the smartest person I know. Tears blurred my vision. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Thank you, my love. You always make me proud." Whoa. It was then that I realized Vanessa's poison wasn't just aimed at me, it was seeping into Ethan too. She was trying to shape his perception of me, to plant seeds of doubt, so that one day he might turn away from me completely. And that I could not allow. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with Ethan's cookies in front of me. They were slightly misshapen, a little too chewy in the middle, but they tasted like love. Each bite reminded me of what was at stake, not just my pride, but my relationship with my grandson. For years, I had endured for Daniel's sake, telling myself it was better to keep the peace, better not to rock the boat. But now, it wasn't just about me. It was about Ethan's right to love his grandmother freely, without interference, without manipulation. The old wounds Vanessa had opened time and again were no longer mine alone to carry. They were beginning to scar my grandson too, and that knowledge burned in me like fire. I looked at the clock. It was past midnight, the house silent, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I pressed my palms against the cool surface of the table and whispered to myself, "No more. No more silence. No more swallowing the insults. No more pretending not to notice." I had taken the first step with those cookies, but it would not be the last. The past had left its scars, yes, but I wasn't finished. This story wasn't just about what Vanessa had done to me. It was about what I was going to do next. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. When you've been on the receiving end of subtle insults for years, they stop sounding like words and start feeling like weights, tiny stones piled into your pockets, until one day you realize you're sinking. That's how Vanessa's kindness had always been to me, polished on the outside, poisoned underneath. After the cookie incident, I found myself remembering more clearly the times she had chipped away at me in front of others. Her favorite tactic being the hidden insult wrapped in silk. One memory stood out most. It was a spring afternoon, maybe 5 years ago. We were all at the park, Daniel grilling, Ethan playing on the swings. Vanessa had invited her friends, a trio of women who looked like they stepped out of glossy magazines. They carried handbags that cost more than my monthly pension and wore heels on the grass, as if the earth itself should adjust to them. I had brought sandwiches, neatly wrapped in wax paper, and set them on the picnic table. Vanessa's friends laughed politely, but she smirked, tilting her head toward me. "Isn't she adorable? Margaret still makes food like it's 1960. I suppose some people never change." The women tittered, and one said, "Oh, it's charming, really. Charming." That word stung like a slap. Not delicious, not thoughtful, not even practical, just charming. A polite way of saying outdated, irrelevant. I forced a smile, but inside I burned. Daniel, as always, said nothing. He flipped burgers at the grill, pretending not to hear. Ethan, still little then, ran to grab a sandwich, oblivious to the undertones. I let it go. What else could I do? Start a fight in the middle of a sunny park? But I remembered. Another time, when Ethan was only 6, I offered to babysit while they went to a dinner party. He and I spent the evening building a fort in the living room, eating popcorn, watching old cartoons I used to show Daniel. When they came home, Vanessa looked at the mess of blankets and laughed in that airy way of hers. "Oh, Margaret," she said, patting my arm as if I were a child. "You really don't know how to keep up with him, do you?" "It's okay. You tried." I wanted to scream. Tried? I had raised a son, managed a classroom full of 30 children for years, survived loneliness after my husband died. But to her, I was trying. Never quite good enough. And then, of course, there was the worst of all. The day she told Daniel in front of me that I shouldn't pick Ethan up from school anymore. "He needs stability," she had said sweetly. And Margaret, Well, she tends to forget things. Forget things? I stared at her, stunned. I'd never once forgotten Ethan, never once been late. But in that single sentence, she had painted me as unreliable. Daniel didn't even argue. He just rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "Maybe she's right, Mom. It's a lot for you." It was a lie, but it stuck. After that, I was no longer allowed to pick Ethan up. A small joy stolen. Just like that. Sitting in my kitchen now, years later, those memories rushed back with crushing clarity. And I understood something I hadn't admitted to myself before. Vanessa wasn't careless with her words. She was deliberate. Each joke, each sweet comment, each fabricated concern, they were pieces of a bigger pattern. She wanted to erase me slowly, make me smaller and smaller, until I vanished. The cookies, then, weren't just cookies. They were my line in the sand. And yet, in those quiet hours of the night, I wondered, had I waited too long? Had I already let her steal too much? The following Sunday, I went to church. Not because I was particularly pious, but because it was one of the few places where I could sit in silence without anyone demanding something from me. The stained glass windows glowed with morning light. The choir hummed softly, and I closed my eyes, letting the words of the sermon wash over me. The pastor spoke about small acts of courage, how even a whisper could ripple louder than a shout. My throat tightened. That was what the cookies had been. A whisper of defiance. After the service, an old friend, Clara, walked me home. She had known me for decades, through widowhood, through raising Daniel alone. "You look troubled," she said gently. "It's Vanessa," I admitted. "Always Vanessa. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever stop finding ways to humiliate me." Clara squeezed my hand. "Some people only feel tall when they've made others feel small. The question is, Margaret, how long will you let her shrink you?" Her words lingered long after she left. That evening, I watched Ethan draw at the kitchen table. He sketched superheroes, giving them powers like invisibility and flight. At one point, he looked up and asked, "Grandma, if you had a superpower, what would it be?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "Strength. The kind you don't see at first. The kind that waits until the right moment." He nodded seriously, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Children often understand more than adults realize. Strength. That was what I needed. Not the loud kind Vanessa wielded with her sharp tongue and her icy smiles, but the quiet kind that endured, and endured until the right moment came. The hidden insults, the years of being diminished, they had built a fire in me. And though I had banked the flames for too long, they were ready now, ready to burn. This wasn't just about old wounds anymore. It was about protecting Ethan from those same poisons. And I promised myself, as I tucked him into bed that night, she will not win. Silence has a way of shaping a person. It can protect you, shield you from escalating a fight that can't be won, but it can also crush you, pressing down until your very identity feels muffled. For years, silence had been my survival. I told myself it was better not to answer Vanessa's jabs, better not to spark another argument Daniel would be forced to mediate. But silence leaves scars. I remember nights when I came home from their house and sat in my living room, staring at the walls while the clock ticked. No one to talk to. No one to hear me say how cruel she had been, how small I had felt. My husband was gone. My closest friends had their own lives. I bottled it all inside, smiling politely when neighbors asked how my family was doing. There was one evening I'll never forget. Vanessa had made some remark about how, these days, grandparents should know their place and let young parents handle things. Daniel had laughed nervously. Ethan had been too busy playing to notice. I swallowed it down, pretended not to care. But when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried silently into my hands, making sure no sound escaped my throat. I didn't want anyone, not even myself, to hear how broken I felt. That was the weight of silence. It made me invisible, not just to them, but sometimes to myself. After the cookie incident, though, silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like complicity. My small act of defiance had opened something inside me, and now the silence pressed even heavier, not because I feared Vanessa, but because I realized how much I had allowed her to win by never answering back. One afternoon, Ethan came over after school. He sprawled on the floor of my living room, doing homework while I knitted on the couch. His pencil scratched the paper, and after a while he said casually, "Mom says you don't talk much because you forget things." My hands stilled. I stared at the half-knitted scarf in my lap, my heart pounding. "Is that what she told you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He nodded. "But I don't think it's true. You remember lots of things. You tell me stories about when Dad was little. You always remember the ones I like best." I forced a smile, blinking back tears. "That's because I've kept them safe in my heart. Don't you worry, Ethan. Forgetting isn't why I don't talk much." "Then why?" I hesitated, weighing how much a child should know. Then I said softly, "Because sometimes talking isn't safe. Sometimes when people don't want to hear the truth, they make you feel small for speaking it." I. Ethan frowned, his young face serious. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," I agreed. He went back to his homework, but his words stayed with me. "That's not fair." Out of the mouths of children, truths often sound the clearest. Later that evening, I sat by my window watching the streetlights flicker on. I thought of all the times I had bitten my tongue when Vanessa told Daniel I was too tired to babysit, when she implied to neighbors that I was dependent on her generosity, when she orchestrated family plans without ever asking if I wanted to be included. I thought of how my silence had let those words settle like dust, covering everything, dulling my spirit. The weight of silence is not just in what you endure, but in how others interpret it. To Vanessa, my quiet had been confirmation. Confirmation that she could speak over me, erase me, define me however she pleased. But the truth was, silence had been my shield, not my surrender. I began to understand that now. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered aloud to the empty room, "No more silence." The sound startled me. My own voice echoing in the quiet felt strange, like I hadn't heard it in years. But it also felt powerful. The next family dinner came quickly. Vanessa was her usual radiant self, entertaining Daniel with stories about her colleagues, complimenting Ethan on his grades, leaving me in the shadows of the conversation. At one point, she turned to me and said brightly, "Margaret, do you even keep up with all these modern things? Sometimes I think you must get lost." Normally, I would have smiled weakly, lowered my eyes, let the silence speak for me. But this time, I looked her directly in the eye and said, "I don't get lost, Vanessa. I just don't follow where I don't want to go." The table went silent. Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Ethan's eyes widened. Vanessa blinked, her smile tightening. I took a sip of water and said nothing more. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. But it was enough. I had answered her. And in that small moment, the weight of silence lifted. Just a little. When I got home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't sit in the dark feeling small. I poured myself a cup of tea, turned on the radio, and let music fill the house. For the first time, in years, I felt lighter. I knew it wasn't the end. Vanessa wouldn't take kindly to being challenged, no matter how gently. But I also knew something had shifted. Silence had been my cage. Speaking, even one simple sentence, was the first key. And I promised myself I wouldn't lock the door again. If silence had been my cage, Daniel was the lock that kept it closed. Not because he was cruel, he had never raised his voice at me, never spoken to me with the sharpness Vanessa did. But his silence, his constant choosing of peace over truth, cut deeper than open hostility ever could. It became clearer than ever after that dinner. The moment I had told Vanessa, "I don't get lost, I just don't follow where I don't want to go." The air at the table had shifted. Ethan's eyes had lit up with something like pride, but Daniel's expression was a mix of shock and warning. When everyone else had gone to bed, Daniel walked me out to the porch. His voice was low, almost pleading. "Mom, you don't have to do this," he said. "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Push back. Make comments like that. You know it upsets Vanessa." I stared at him, the night air cool against my cheeks. "Daniel, has it ever occurred to you that maybe she upsets me? That maybe I'm tired of being her punching bag?" His shoulders slumped. I don't want Ethan to see us fighting. It's confusing for him." I felt my heart twist. What's confusing is watching his grandmother sit in silence while his mother treats her like nothing. Don't you see? That silence teaches him something too. It teaches him that disrespect is acceptable. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said, "Please, Mom, just let things be." And there it was. Let things be. That was Daniel's answer to everything. Not because he didn't care, but because he had been living under Vanessa's control so long he thought harmony was worth any price. Even if the cost was me. The divide in our family was no longer invisible. It stretched right down the middle of that house. Vanessa on one side, wielding her polished cruelty. Daniel standing behind her, weary but loyal. And Ethan, caught between the two, torn by a love too big for his small body. The next time Ethan visited me, I could see the tension in him. He was quieter, hesitant, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. I poured him a glass of milk, set cookies on the table, and asked gently, "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" He shrugged, nibbling at a cookie. "Mom says you don't like her." "Is that true?" My breath caught. "What do you think?" "I think you don't smile when she's around," he said carefully. I reached across the table and took his small hand in mine. "Ethan, sometimes people don't get along, and sometimes they hurt each other without meaning to. But no matter what happens between me and your mother, it doesn't change how much I love you. Do you understand?" He nodded slowly, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. Vanessa was planting seeds, trying to turn his heart against me. I couldn't let her succeed. Later, when I walked him back to Daniel's car, I bent down and whispered, "Never doubt my love, Ethan. Not for a second." He hugged me tight, and in that moment I felt both stronger and more fragile than I had in years. Stronger because his love gave me courage, fragile because I knew how easily Vanessa could twist it. That weekend, I overheard something that confirmed my fears. I had dropped by unannounced to return a casserole dish. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices inside. Vanessa's sharp tone carried clearly through the door. "She's undermining me, Daniel, right in front of Ethan. Don't you see what she's doing? She wants him to love her more than me." My chest tightened. Daniel sighed. "Vanessa, she's his grandmother. Of course he loves her." "She's manipulative," Vanessa pressed. "You don't see it because she's your mother, but I do. If you don't set boundaries, she'll keep taking over." Taking over? I wanted to laugh bitterly. If silence and patience were taking over, then perhaps she was right. I slipped away before they could catch me listening, my heart heavy. That was how she saw me, as a rival for Ethan's love, not a grandmother. And Daniel, though not agreeing outright, didn't defend me either. He never did. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something important. Vanessa didn't just want me small, she wanted me erased. She wanted Ethan's love to flow only to her, unchallenged, unshared. But what she didn't understand was that love cannot be controlled, no matter how hard you try to cage it. The divide in our family was becoming a battlefield, and Ethan was the prize. And I, for the first time, was ready to fight. Once I understood that Vanessa wanted to erase me, I stopped pretending otherwise. I realized that if I kept reacting in the moment, one small jab for every insult, one cutting remark for every dismissal, I would never get ahead of her. She thrived on control, on keeping me off balance. What she wouldn't expect was my silence turning into something else. Observation. So I began watching her, carefully. At family dinners, I paid attention not just to what she said, but how she said it. When she wanted to discredit me, she didn't do it with direct cruelty. She did it with small shifts in tone, with the raise of an eyebrow, with a laugh that invited others to join her at my expense. Like the evening she told a story about Ethan's science project. He built the solar system out of styrofoam balls, she said proudly, glancing at me. Grandma helped him paint the planets. It was sweet, though. Pluto looked more like a potato, didn't it? Everyone laughed, including Daniel. I smiled politely, but I saw it for what it was, a way to turn my involvement into a joke, to make my effort seem clumsy rather than loving. And people joined her, not because they wanted to hurt me, but because her tone made it easy. That was her power. She could shape how others saw me without ever seeming cruel. I started noticing patterns. She would praise Ethan lavishly when he distanced himself from me. Look how independent you're becoming, not always running to grandma. And when he showed me affection, she'd undercut it with a remark about me being too fragile, too outdated. Slowly, she was weaving a story where I was the extra piece, the burden. I began keeping a journal, not just of her words, but of the context, the people present, the timing, the way Daniel responded, the way Ethan looked at me afterward. I wrote it all down, line by line, as though I were a student taking notes in class. And as I wrote, I realized something chilling. Vanessa wasn't careless at all. She was strategic. She chose her moments when Daniel was nearby, when friends or neighbors could overhear, when Ethan was watching. Every jab had a purpose. But what gave me hope was Ethan himself. One afternoon, he came over after school, dropping his backpack with a sigh. "Grandma, do you ever feel like no one listens to you?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I feel that way. Like when I tell Mom I want to spend the weekend here. She just says no without asking you if it's okay. Like my words don't matter." I felt a surge of both sadness and pride. He was young, but he already understood something deep. The pain of being dismissed. I bent down and held his face in my hands. "Ethan, your words matter. Maybe not to everyone, but always to me." He smiled faintly. "That's why I like talking to you." Oh, that night, after he left, I sat with my journal and wrote those words. "That's why I like talking to you." They were my reminder that Vanessa hadn't won yet. Her story wasn't the only one being written. As weeks passed, I noticed cracks in her armor. At a neighborhood gathering, she told a story about how I once burned a casserole, laughing as though it were hilarious. A neighbor politely chuckled, but then said, "Oh, I think it's sweet Margaret still cooks for you all. Not many parents get that." For the first time, I saw Vanessa's smile falter. She didn't like when her jokes didn't land the way she intended. I filed that away. Another time, when she told Daniel I was too old to drive safely, Ethan piped up, "That's not true. Grandma drives me places all the time, and she's careful." Vanessa's face tightened, but she let it drop. Each observation, each journal entry, felt like gathering small stones to build a wall. A quiet defense. I began to understand that Vanessa needed people to see me a certain way. Weak, bumbling, outdated. But if I could gather enough evidence, not just facts, but the truth of her intentions, I could show Daniel, maybe even Ethan, who she really was. The trick was patience. I didn't confront her, not yet. I smiled when she laughed at me, nodded when she dismissed me, all the while writing everything down. But inside, I was no longer the silent victim. I was the witness. And though she didn't know it, I was preparing. Because one day, I would open that journal. And when I did, the truth would no longer be hidden. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of power. Not the loud, cutting kind Vanessa wielded. Mine was quiet, steady, waiting. I closed the journal one evening and whispered to myself, "Your time will come." And deep down, I knew it would. It was a Saturday afternoon when Ethan showed me where his loyalty truly lay. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain, and we sat together in my living room, the old clock ticking steadily in the background. He had brought his sketchbook with him, pages filled with superheroes and spaceships, but that day he wasn't as talkative as usual. "Grandma," he said quietly, pencil tapping against the page. "Do you think Mom doesn't like you?" The question hit me like a sudden gust of cold air. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, eyes downcast. "Because she says things sometimes. Like that you're too old, or that you forget stuff. But I know it's not true. You always remember the stories I like. And you never forget to pick me up when you promise." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Ethan, sometimes people say things that aren't fair. But you know me better than anyone. Do you believe what she says?" He shook his head firmly. "Number, I know you. You're the best." "Oh." I reached over and pulled him into a hug, breathing in the smell of crayons and shampoo. His small arms wrapped around me tightly, and in that moment I realized something profound. Vanessa could try to twist Daniel's view of me. She could try to paint me as irrelevant to neighbors and friends, but Ethan saw me clearly. He loved me for who I was, not who she claimed I was. That night, as rain began to fall outside, Ethan confided in me something even more heartbreaking. "Sometimes I pretend I'm sick so I don't have to go with Mom to her friends' houses," he whispered. "Because she always talks about you there. She laughs and says stuff like you're stuck in the past. It makes me mad. I don't want to hear it." My chest tightened, anger and sorrow mixing in equal measure. My sweet boy was being dragged into this web of ridicule, forced to hear his mother diminish someone he loved. No child should have to carry that. I stroked his hair gently. "Ethan, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry you have to hear those things. But remember, her words don't define me, and they don't define you. You get to decide what you believe." He looked up at me, eyes wide with determination. "I believe in you." Those words sank deep into my heart. I believe in you. More than anything, that was what I needed to hear. From then on, Ethan began showing his loyalty in small, quiet ways. When Vanessa made a joke at my expense, he would frown instead of laughing. When she tried to steer him away from spending time with me, he would insist gently, "I want to go to Grandma's." Sometimes, he would slip me little notes he had written in shaky handwriting. "You're the best grandma ever." One afternoon, he surprised me with another box of cookies. This time, they were less lopsided, more carefully shaped. He handed them to me with a grin. "These are just for us. Don't give them away, okay?" I laughed, hugging him close. "I promise, these are ours." We sat at the table, dunking cookies in milk, crumbs scattering everywhere. For a while, it was just us. No Vanessa, no Daniel, no tension. Just the simple, pure bond between a grandmother and her grandson. But even in those moments of joy, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. Vanessa wasn't blind. She must have noticed Ethan's subtle defiance, the way he clung to me more fiercely than before, and I knew it would only fuel her determination to push me further out. One evening, as I walked Ethan back to the car after a visit, Vanessa rolled down the window and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. We wouldn't want him to overstay, you know. Children need balance." I smiled politely, but Ethan squeezed my hand tightly before climbing into the back seat. His eyes met mine through the glass, filled with silent reassurance. "I'm with you," they seemed to say. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Vanessa might have Daniel under her thumb. She might twist the truth for the neighbors, but Ethan saw through it. His love for me was unshakable, and his quiet loyalty gave me the courage I needed. That night, I sat with my journal, writing down everything Ethan had said. His belief in me was more than comfort, it was proof. Proof that Vanessa's narrative wasn't absolute. Proof that love could resist manipulation. I ended my entry with one simple sentence. Ethan is my strength. Because he was. And with his small acts of loyalty, I knew I could endure whatever Vanessa tried next. But deep down, I also knew something else. The more she realized she was losing her grip on Ethan, the harder she would fight to reclaim it. The storm wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The revelation came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that seemed harmless at first. I had gone to the corner store to pick up milk and flour, walking slowly down the familiar aisles, when I heard my name spoken in a hushed, conspiratorial tone. Margaret, a woman was saying, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch. I paused near the shelves of cereal, pretending to browse, and leaned in slightly. It was Mrs. Carter, one of Vanessa's neighbors. She was speaking to another woman, her face lit with the kind of amusement people get when gossip feels too delicious to keep inside. She told us Margaret didn't even want the cookies her grandson made, handed them right back to Vanessa at the table. Can you imagine? Poor Ethan. Must have crushed him. The other woman gasped softly. That's awful. Who does that to a child? My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to step out from behind the shelf, to shout the truth, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. Mrs. Carter leaned closer, lowering her voice. And that's not the only thing. Vanessa says Margaret forgets things all the time, that she's not really capable of watching Ethan anymore. She practically hinted that Margaret's slipping, losing her mind a little. The women shared a look of pity wrapped in judgment. I felt heat rise to my face, shame burning through me. It wasn't enough for Vanessa to belittle me in her home, in front of Daniel and Ethan. She was spreading it further, shaping me into the image she wanted the world to see. A forgetful, ungrateful, declining old woman. I left the store without buying a thing, my hands trembling as I clutched my purse. The walk home felt endless, every step weighed down by humiliation. By the time I closed my front door behind me, I couldn't hold back the tears. It wasn't just insults anymore, it was a campaign. Vanessa wasn't satisfied with controlling the narrative inside her home. She wanted to control it outside too, to make sure everyone saw me the way she did. Weak, irrelevant, unworthy of love. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my journal open, but my hands shook too much to write. I thought of Ethan, of how she must talk about me, even in front of him. I thought of Daniel, swallowing her words like they were truth, because it was easier than standing against her. And I thought of myself, a woman who had raised a son, worked 30 years as a teacher, survived widowhood now being painted as useless. I whispered aloud to the empty kitchen. I won't let you do this to me. It was the first time I allowed myself to say it out loud. And once I did, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The next day, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. People greeted me politely, but I could see it now, the flicker of pity in their eyes. The way they spoke just a little too slowly, too gently. The rumor had already taken root. I forced myself to smile, to hold my head high, but inside, the fire grew hotter. That evening, Ethan came over after school. He noticed my mood immediately. Grandma, what's wrong? I hesitated. He was only 10. But he deserved the truth, at least part of it. Some people are saying things about me that aren't true, I said softly. His brow furrowed. Is it Mom? I nodded slightly, his little fists clenched. She shouldn't. You're not like that. You're not forgetful. You're the smartest person I know. Tears filled my eyes. I pulled him close, whispering. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. Later, when Daniel came to pick him up, I almost told him what I had overheard at the store. But the words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I already knew his response. Denial. Dismissal. Excuses. Vanessa didn't mean it that way. You're imagining things. Number. This time, I needed more than my word against hers. I needed proof. So I began a new plan. Instead of just observing, I started gathering. writing down not only what she said but when, where, and to whom. I kept notes of neighbors' remarks, of the moments when Vanessa slipped and revealed her disdain too clearly. And as the pages filled, my shame slowly shifted into resolve. She thought she could twist the truth until everyone believed her version. But truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried deep. One evening, as I closed my journal, I whispered to myself, "How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone?" The thought both frightened and thrilled me. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring. I was preparing. Once I realized Vanessa's gossip wasn't just casual cruelty but a deliberate campaign, my perspective changed completely. No longer was I merely the target of her barbs. I was a witness collecting evidence, a quiet archivist of her malice. And if she wanted to spin her stories, then I would prepare a story of my own, one rooted not in venom, but in truth. The turning point came one evening when Clara, my old friend from church, dropped by for tea. She sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, listening as I told her what I had overheard at the store. Clara shook her head slowly. "That woman's trying to ruin your reputation, Margaret. But gossip only has power if it goes unanswered. Have you thought about writing it down? Keeping track?" I smiled faintly, pulling my journal from the counter. Its pages were already thick with entries, dates, places, words etched in ink, like scars on paper. I slid it across the table. "I've been doing more than thinking about it." Clara flipped through, her brow furrowing as she read. "This is powerful. People forget words, but paper doesn't." Her words planted a seed in me. For so long, my silence had made me complicit. But now, my silence was becoming something sharper, something that could cut when the time came. I started carrying a small notebook in my purse. At church socials, at neighborhood gatherings, even at Daniel and Vanessa's dinners, I discreetly jotted things down afterward, little details that might one day matter. The way Vanessa rolled her eyes when I offered to help. The way she whispered to a friend, loud enough for me to hear, "Margaret really shouldn't be driving anymore." I also began saving small, tangible pieces of proof. A birthday card where Vanessa had written, "Thanks for not interfering too much this year." A text message that Daniel had forwarded absent-mindedly, where Vanessa complained about me to a friend. "She clings to Ethan like he's her only reason to exist." Each piece, small on its own, was another stitch in the tapestry of truth I was weaving. But the most important part wasn't just collecting it, was waiting. Vanessa thrived on control. She believed I was still the quiet, weary woman who let her words slip by without protest. If I revealed my hand too soon, she'd tighten her grip. No. I needed patience. Ethan, meanwhile, became my anchor. One rainy afternoon, we sat together working on a puzzle. He was quiet for a long time before he finally said, "Grandma, why does Mom always talk about you like you're not in the room?" I swallowed hard. Sometimes people use words to make themselves feel stronger. But that doesn't make the words true. He looked up at me, his eyes serious beyond his years. "When I'm older, I'm going to tell everyone you're the smartest person I know." Tears blurred my vision, but I forced a smile. "Promise?" "Promise," he said, holding out his pinky. We sealed it with a pinky swear, and I felt a flicker of hope that no rumor, no manipulation, could erase the bond we shared. But Vanessa sensed the shift. She wasn't oblivious. She saw Ethan's loyalty leaning toward me, and it made her restless. One evening, after another tense dinner, she cornered me in the kitchen, while Daniel was upstairs, helping Ethan with homework. "Margaret," she began, her tone deceptively sweet, "I think it would be best if you visited less often. Ethan needs stability, and honestly, you confuse him." I met her gaze. Calm, but unyielding. "Confuse him how?" Her smile tightened. "With your mixed messages. He doesn't know who to listen to, his mother or his grandmother. And frankly, it's unfair to him." I set down the dish I was drying. Unfair to him or unfair to you? Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw the iron beneath the velvet. Careful, Margaret, she said softly. You don't want to make this worse for yourself. I didn't reply. I simply dried my hands and walked out of the kitchen. But inside, I was steady as stone. Her words weren't a warning, they were confirmation. Confirmation that she felt her control slipping, and that scared her. That night, I wrote in my journal. She fears exposure more than anything. That is her weakness. From that moment, my strategy sharpened. I wasn't going to scream, wasn't going to fight in front of Ethan or the neighbors. Instead, I would wait for the right moment, a moment when she least expected it. Until then, I would let her speak, let her dig deeper. And all the while, I would be there watching, writing, waiting. I closed the journal, the pages heavy beneath my hands. For years, silence had been my prison. But now, silence was my weapon. And soon, Vanessa would learn just how dangerous a quiet woman can be. The night of the confrontation dinner wasn't planned by me, at least, not in the way Vanessa might have thought. It was her idea to host, another one of her perfectly staged evenings meant to impress neighbors and friends. She loved being the center of attention, her home sparkling like a showroom, her meals plated like something out of a magazine. Daniel called a week before. Mom, Vanessa wants you to come. It's important to her. I almost laughed at the irony. Important to her. My presence wasn't a gesture of love. It was a prop in her performance. The doting mother-in-law she could parade around while telling the world how tiresome I really was. But I agreed, because I knew something she didn't. I was no longer just an extra in her script. That evening, I dressed carefully. A simple navy dress, pearls my late husband had given me on our 30th anniversary, hair brushed back neatly, not flashy, not meek dignified. When I arrived, the house was already full. Laughter spilled from the dining room, wine glasses clinked, and Vanessa floated among her guests like a hostess born for the role. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, too sweet, her perfume overwhelming. Margaret, so glad you could join us. I smiled politely. Of course, family comes first, doesn't it? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. She wasn't used to me answering her pleasantries with words that carried weight. The evening unfolded as expected. Vanessa told stories, drawing laughter from her friends. Daniel sat quietly, his smile thin, his eyes darting to me every so often as if to gauge my mood. Ethan sat beside me, his hand brushing mine under the table, a silent comfort. And then it came. The moment she couldn't resist. As dessert was served, a perfect chocolate torte, she made sure everyone knew she had baked from scratch. She began a story. Oh, you'll love this, she said, her eyes twinkling as she looked around the table. Last year, Ethan made cookies for his grandmother's birthday. And do you know what happened? She gave them right back to me. Laughter rippled around the table. Vanessa leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. Poor Ethan. He was devastated. We had to reassure him that it wasn't his fault. The laughter grew. I felt Ethan stiffen beside me, his little shoulders tensing. For years, I would have smiled weakly, let it pass, swallowed the humiliation like bitter medicine. But not this time. I set my fork down gently, letting the clink of silverware draw attention. The table quieted. That's not what happened, I said softly, but my voice carried. Vanessa's smile faltered. I raised a hand. Ethan made me cookies, yes. They were beautiful. But what you've told isn't the truth. I gave them to you, Vanessa, because I wanted you to taste his love too. I thought sharing was a way of honoring what he'd made. Ethan knows that. All eyes turned to him. His cheeks flushed, but he sat up straighter. That's true, he said firmly. Grandma loved them. She just wanted everyone to share. The silence that followed was heavy. I saw Vanessa's face tighten, the perfect mask cracking just a little. I reached into my purse, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note Ethan had given me months ago. In his shaky handwriting, it read, "You're the best grandma ever." I laid it gently on the table. "This is what he gave me after," I said. "Does that look like a child who thought his grandmother didn't want his gift?" The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. One woman cleared her throat. Daniel rubbed his temples, clearly torn. Vanessa laughed too brightly. "Well, perhaps I misremembered. You know how stories get exaggerated." I looked at her calmly. "No, Vanessa. You didn't misremember. You misrepresented. And you've been doing it for years. To your friends, to neighbors, even to Daniel." Her eyes widened, but I continued, my voice steady, never raising. "I've kept quiet a long time, but silence doesn't erase truth. And the truth is, I've heard what you've said about me, that I'm forgetful, that I'm irrelevant, that I don't belong. But I raised a son. I taught children for 30 years. I built a life I refused to have erased by gossip." The room was utterly still. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Ethan cut in, his young voice strong. "Mom, stop saying bad things about Grandma. She's the best person I know." The shock in her face was priceless. She hadn't expected resistance from him. Not her own son. Daniel looked between us, his face pale. For once, he didn't rush to smooth things over. He simply sat in silence, letting the truth hang in the air. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "That's all I wanted to say," I finished. "The rest is up to you, all to decide what to believe." For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The dinner resumed awkwardly, the laughter muted now, the air thick with unspoken questions. Vanessa kept her smile fixed, but her eyes darted, restless, unsettled. The perfect mask she had worn for so long was cracking, and everyone at that table had seen it. When I left that night, Ethan hugged me tighter than ever. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," he whispered. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of myself too. The confrontation dinner lingered in the air, long after the plates were cleared. I could feel it a shift, small but undeniable. For once, I hadn't been the silent bystander. I had spoken, and more importantly, Ethan had spoken. His little voice cutting through Vanessa's polished performance had left ripples she could not control. In the days that followed, I sensed the tension. Daniel called me once, his voice uncertain. "Mom," "about the other night," he began, trailing off as if he wasn't sure whose side he was supposed to be on. "Yes, Daniel?" I said gently. I didn't expect you to bring things up in front of everyone." "You mean, you didn't expect me to tell the truth?" I corrected softly. There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "Vanessa's upset." "I imagine she is," I replied. "But Daniel, ask yourself, is she upset because I embarrassed her, or because the truth was finally spoken?" He didn't answer. That told me enough. But the real turning point came not from me, but from Ethan. Children see more than we think, and sometimes they have the courage adults lack. It was a Friday evening when it happened. Vanessa had invited neighbors again, this time for a casual gathering. I was there because Daniel insisted, though I could tell Vanessa would have preferred otherwise. I sat quietly in the corner, sipping tea, while she held court with her stories. At one point, she began again the same tired routine of belittling wrapped in charm. "Oh, Margaret tries her best, bless her heart. But sometimes it's just easier if I handle things myself. You know how it is with older folks, they mean well, but they forget details." The group chuckled politely. Before I could speak, Ethan stood up. His small voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "That's not true." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. Vanessa blinked, startled. "Ethan," he cut her off. "Grandma doesn't forget things. She remembers all my stories. She remembers my favorite color, my favorite food, the games I like. She remembers more about me than you do." 1. Gasps rippled around the room. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. Ethan continued, his little hands balled into fists. And she's not slow or confused. She's the one who helps me with homework when you're too busy. She's the one who listens to me when I'm sad. She's the one who makes me feel important. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, tears welling in my eyes. My grandson, 10 years old, was speaking the truth I had carried for years, in front of everyone. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. Sweetheart, you don't understand. Yes, I do, Ethan interrupted firmly. I understand perfectly. You don't want Grandma here. But I do. And she's my grandma. That means she belongs. The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared to laugh now. The neighbors glanced at each other, uncomfortable, realizing they had been complicit in Vanessa's narrative, without ever questioning it. Daniel sat pale and motionless, his fork clutched tightly in his hand. For once, he didn't shush his son. He didn't change the subject. He just sat there, face heavy with the weight of truth. Vanessa's smile collapsed. Her lips trembled as she tried to recover. Ethan, honey, you don't mean… I do, he said, his eyes fierce. Grandma is the best person I know, and you should stop saying things about her that aren't true. My hands trembled in my lap. I wanted to gather him into my arms, shield him from the storm I knew was about to break. But I also knew he needed this moment. It wasn't just my battle anymore. It was his. The neighbors quickly found excuses to leave after that, murmuring awkward goodbyes, avoiding Vanessa's eyes. When the door finally closed, the house felt heavier than stone. Vanessa rounded on Ethan, her voice sharp. How dare you embarrass me like that in front of everyone? But before I could intervene, Daniel finally spoke. His voice was low, firm, in a way I hadn't heard in years. Vanessa, stop. She froze, stunned. Daniel set his fork down with a clatter. He's right. Mom remembers everything. She's not forgetful. She's not useless. She's my mother. And if you can't respect her, then maybe you're the one who needs to rethink how you behave. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at him, betrayal etched across her face, as if she couldn't believe he had chosen this moment after years of silence to finally stand against her. But he had. And Ethan had led the way. I sat quietly, my chest heaving with a mixture of pride, sorrow, and relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I didn't have to. My grandson and my son were doing it for me. That night, after things had settled, and Vanessa retreated upstairs in angry silence, Ethan came to sit beside me on the couch. He leaned against me, his head on my shoulder. I told them the truth, Grandma. I kissed the top of his hair, tears slipping down my cheeks. Yes, sweetheart. You did. And as I held him close, I realized something profound. Vanessa could never erase me. Not while Ethan's love burned so brightly. Not while Daniel's silence had finally broken. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in that moment, I felt a victory. A quiet, undeniable victory. The days after Ethan spoke up were like the clearing of a storm. The air in Daniel and Vanessa's house was heavy, but the silence was no longer mine to carry alone. For years, I had borne the weight of Vanessa's disdain quietly, swallowing it to keep the peace. Now, for the first time, it was out in the open. Vanessa avoided me for weeks. When I came to visit, she would retreat to another room, slamming doors softly, pretending to be busy. The neighbors stopped echoing her stories. Some even came to me privately, confessing they had believed her words, until Ethan's brave defense made them question everything. Daniel tried to keep things steady, but I could see the cracks forming in his loyalty to her. He began visiting me more often, sometimes bringing Ethan alone. We would sit on my porch, the three of us, sipping lemonade as the boy chattered about school. Occasionally, Daniel would glance at me with guilt in his eyes, as if silently apologizing for all the years he had failed to speak. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold, He said softly, "Mom, I should have defended you sooner. I should have seen what she was doing." I laid a hand on his. "It's never too late to see the truth, Daniel. What matters is that you see it now." Vanessa still carried her bitterness like a cloak, but I no longer felt crushed beneath it. Because I had something she could never take: Ethan's love, Daniel's awakening, and my own reclaimed dignity. The final act didn't come with shouting, or revenge, or triumph. It came quietly, in the stillness of my home, with Ethan curled up beside me, reading aloud from a book. His voice stumbled over the bigger words, and I corrected him gently, just as I once had with Daniel years ago. When he finished, he looked at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Grandma, will you always be here? Even when Mom says things?" I hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, my chest aching with love. "I will always be here, Ethan, no matter what anyone says." And in that moment, I knew I didn't need to win against Vanessa. I didn't need to expose her to the world or see her brought low. The truth had already spoken through Ethan's courage, through Daniel's quiet shift, through my own refusal to stay silent any longer. Vanessa could keep her bitterness, her stories, her masks. I had something stronger. I had the love of my grandson. I had my son slowly finding his way back to me. And I had my own voice, no longer silenced. The war she waged had been meant to erase me. Instead, it had only revealed the strength I didn't know I still carried. As the evening faded and the stars began to appear, I sat with Ethan on the porch swing, his small hand resting in mine. The night was quiet, but not empty. It was full of truth, of love, of survival. And I thought to myself, dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to disappear. Emotional fade out. 200-300 words. Life has not returned to perfect harmony. Vanessa still tries, in her own way, to edge me out. She still drops remarks, still bristles when Ethan chooses to spend time with me. But something is different now. Her words no longer carry the same power. The people around her have heard the cracks in her story. And Ethan, sweet, loyal Ethan, knows the truth of his grandmother's heart. I no longer carry the weight of silence alone. I no longer go home in tears after dinners, crushed by what I couldn't say. Instead, I return home with the warmth of Ethan's hugs still lingering, with Daniel's hesitant but growing acknowledgement that he sees me again. And perhaps most importantly, I return home with the knowledge that I chose not to vanish. That I stood, in my own quiet way, and said, "I am here. I matter." So, if you ever find yourself in the shadows, belittled or dismissed, remember this. Even the smallest voice, spoken at the right time, can change everything. I was given a box of cookies on my birthday. Small, imperfect, baked with love. I gave them away to make a point, and from that small act, a fire was lit that could not be put out. And now, as I hold my grandson's hand under the night sky, I know I am exactly where I'm meant to be seen. Loved. Unshaken.